Welcome back. We have a really exciting day today. I'm super excited because my colleague John Cliss gets to present. We're going to be hearing from Dan Winter. We're going to be hearing from the Sapphire Group, which is super exciting. Toby Groats as well. So we have an amazing, wonderful lineup where we get to hear from Dr. Paul Laviolette as it relates to cosmology. And I just think that today's lineup is very interesting and very probably different than yesterday. But obviously, all of those pieces go together to make up breakthrough energy technology. So I just want to take a couple of minutes before John comes up just to discuss yesterday. What did we discuss? We actually didn't even discuss tech too much on the panel discussion, did we? Not so much, right? But we know it relates to what we discussed, that it relates to the technology. The opportunity was put on the table to do so in trying to bring up a little bit more about the open sourcing, which I'm sure we will get to further on the panel discussion today and get into a deep conversation about that. But we discussed human behavior, vision, heart intelligence, and also the market in general about business and money as it relates to breakthrough energy technology. We discussed vision. We discussed ego, doing it for the right reason. And I want to offer something up that some things are intellectually simple, but behaviorally complex. Right? So ego, for example, we can say that term, but what does that relate to behaviorally? And we may have different definitions of that, and someone may have done a lot of self-development work, someone may have done a small amount of self-development work. So there's different varying definitions about what that means and what that is. I saw something shift yesterday with this field of emerging technology. An experienced world of what I'll call some hardcore tech meets a different kind of inventor, technician and interested party, as well as very activated youth. The environmental movement, so to speak, has activated a lot of youth. And I think it's something that we're seeing, obviously, all around the globe. And that's something to really take into consideration as it relates to the older generation and the younger generation. They have much to offer to one another. I'd like to say to the older generation, you have been the outcast to your contemporaries for ages. You've worked diligently, likely experienced financial hardships for your choices to be involved in this type of work. You've had to keep holding your own in order to remain steadfast in your pursuit. You are seen, you are acknowledged, and we are grateful. And this isn't just coming from me, this is coming from the youth who have said this. They see this within these people in the field who've held it for a long time. The younger generation has something to offer: grace, ease, and renewed hope on a deeper level. I had a conversation last night with two incredible men and a woman who were over 5 desserts, who were talking about the future. They will embody the vision. They are the vision. They talk of emotions, heart, self-development, ego death, the feminine, awareness of indigenous wisdom. Transformation and healing is literally a part of their DNA. This isn't an either or, younger, older, male, female. This is about cooperation and collaboration amongst these generations. They do have a vision, a regenerated Mother Earth, embracing diversity, openness, transparency, equitable participation, and what could all of this lead to? The capacity to not only see these technologies we've been talking about for years come to fruition, but to be a part of a cosmic community. It is part of our natural evolution to reach higher, to reach deeper, to experience greater joy, richer love, and to connect with one another genuinely. We hear I am you and you are me. Again, intellectually simple, behaviorally a bit complex, especially when someone has a differing view than we have or vice versa. But that's the coherency of human interaction, and it can create an abundantly beautiful, clean, healthy, and bio-life-rich world. So I offer you a bit of that reflection that came in this morning after my body digested that much glucose, so that much sugar. So that was a good thing. So thank you for listening. And I guess the question, that has come up is we've got all this activated youth that because of we'll say the climate shifting, right? It's debatable as to whether it's cooling or warming. And again, that's not something we're here to get into that discussion. But how do we work to guide all of this energy towards what we're here for, these breakthrough energy technology solutions? Because there are options that are becoming more viable and becoming more available. So it's not something I can answer right now, but I just pose that to you because I think that's a to-do for many of us. So without further ado, John Cliss, my colleague, a little bit about John. He's worked in the research and development industry, in the defense industry for the British Ministry of Defence in the UK for 12 years until 2014. Then John went through a significant awakening process, which turned his attention away from designing weapons of war to technologies of abundance. And since John has worked to develop new energy technologies that create abundant amounts of clean power. He has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Mathematics and Computer Science. And a little bit about John is he is a well-studied man of Rudolf Steiner. And you will see that a lot of Steiner has influenced John's work more formally. So it's my pleasure to bring you up here today.
Okay. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Hi, my name's John Cliss, and I'm here today on behalf of the Nui Foundation. There's three of us from the Nui Foundation here. Susan is my co-director, and also Isabella Dos Santos is been working with us now for about 7 or 8 months in a capacity as a project manager. Now, on arriving here today, or yesterday, or Friday, I was told that I was the guy that nobody really knew, which is absolutely great. I've been working behind the scenes in this area of what we call new energy technology, sometimes called free energy over unity machines, for really about 10 years. And I've deliberately stayed hidden for reasons that you're going to find out. I have done one conference before, but today is definitely on a different level. So I think there's a good reason for that. There's a good timing reason for that, and we're going to go into that today. Now, I was looking for a picture of someone who was looking really bemused, and this did it pretty well. This is pretty much how I am most of the time, trying to work out this question of free energy. It sounds great, but does it work? It's a really tough question to answer, that one. And it's something that I've personally put a lot of time and energy and finances into answering. And today I'm going to share some of that learning that I've gone through on the journey. Now, I'm going to put a little bit of a twist on this. Normally I could stand up here and I could talk to you for an hour on technologies that I've seen, in all different places of the world, and there is going to be something of that. But I've had lots of conversations with people over the past couple of days, and I realize there's something deeper which wants to come through here. And so you'll have to forgive me, but I'm going to put a little bit of a personal story in to try and paint a little bit of a picture as to what this deeper story is, because I think it's more profound and important than the technology itself. And so I'm going to use the personal story in order to bring some light to what this deeper aspect is. Now, many of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But a little bit of background, first of all, before I get into that. So, yeah, 2002, dropped out of uni, finished uni, went straight into the defense industry, like many other children, and I was a child, really. Didn't know what to do with my life, and just ended up somewhere that pays you a wage. I was a mathematician, and I was working in a big corporate environment with lots of physicists, aeronautical engineers, electrical engineers, all sorts of what I'd call smart people. And I didn't feel too smart being a mathematician in comparison. But that put me in really good stead. I realized that I hadn't been pre-programmed with certain ideas about how physics should be. And that left me a lot more open-minded, I think, towards discovering what we're going to see today. Many of the projects I worked on over the years, I started off doing a lot of everything to do with electromagnetism, simulation, 3D modeling, building antennas, radar, and then eventually, about 2004-05, I had a certain way of being quite creative with technologies, and I moved into a really small R&D group within a company called MBDA Systems. So I started at BAE Systems, big conglomerate, worked on the aircraft carrier, various destroyers, and on the communications system. Ended up in MBDA in this very small research team. And this was kind of like the crazy ideas people, like it's actually called Sparkworks, which is supposed to be the UK equivalent of Skunkworks, which was, cute. And it was great because we had unlimited budgets, we had amazing labs, we could just do whatever we wanted. We were given the remit of designing stuff that might be applicable to one product line sometime in the next 30 years, and that was more or less it. So I'd have stacks of research papers, published papers, and we're looking for these most interesting stuff coming out of academia, trying to understand it, and then trying to usually replicate it or build it or apply it to something. In my case, I was applying a lot of things to stealth. I was trying to make things invisible, mainly to radar, and we did some really cool stuff. We got a lot of traction, which I'm obviously not going to give you any details about, because it was all classified, super classified. Everything you did is classified. Some of you here will know what I'm talking about, but the way it works in this defense industry is everything is compartmentalized with code words. So you don't know what the guys next to you are working on because of these code words, and everything's top secret, and there's all sorts of classifications above that. So, but that was fine. That's just the way it works. That's the whole system we're in. Now, as a result of working in this area, I got, I think, pretty good at trying to think differently with new types of technologies and the application, particularly, of those technologies. So theory into practice, that's really where I was sat. But as I mentioned earlier, I was a mathematician in a physicist world. And I would be reminded of that constantly by my peers in a jokey way. And as I said, I felt like I wasn't preloaded with those particular concepts. And as I was really getting into the depths of electromagnetism, something was just holding me, and I just couldn't get it. And it was like, what is electricity? And what are electrons, and what are fields, like electromagnetic fields? What are these things? And there's some people in this room who have some great answers to that. But to me, that's not an easy question. These are concepts that we work with, but they are not concepts. They do not explain what it means. And so this got me really rattled, because I was working with things and designing things, and I didn't understand what it is I was working with. Now, this led to something. And now we're just going to diverge a little bit onto a little bit more of the personal story, just for a couple of slides, because it's going to feed back into the bigger picture as we answer the question about the technology. And this was, for me, in my personal case, and I know many people have had these discussions, have had a similar situation to this. I had an experience in 2009 without any drugs or alcohol or nothing, where I was lying in bed and I was asking the question, what do I do with my life? I was having an ethical epiphany about my role in the defense industry, and why was it that my skills and the skills of thousands of other engineers, really great guys and girls all around me, why was all of their energy being channeled towards better and better ways of killing people? It seemed crazy, and to you guys that might seem, yeah, of course, but really, it took me years to realize that's what the world is going on. So I was asking, what's going on? And I'm lying there one night, and all I can say is that I saw through the physical reality of our universe, and I saw that we were all made of energy, and I saw these. This is the closest picture from the film The Matrix that I've seen to what I saw, but it was, in my case, it was blue. I saw these blue-tinged fields in my hand and along the walls and the edges of the room, and I could see all the energy fields moving and manipulating all around. And I was like, wow, this is trippy. And then all of a sudden, I just felt this big wave of energy come at me. It was like it came from the infinite, and it was coming towards me. And I could almost feel it or sense it. And this wave of energy comes in, and it was like a voice, but not a voice. And it just said, energy, right? And this word rolled over me, and I just burst into laughter, complete joy. And I laughed, and it was the most liberating experience I've ever felt. And at that point, I had my answer that I had been searching for so many years. Energy, yes. And this rolled in again and again. And for 6 hours, I lay in bed, and then I went down to the sofa, and I was laughing continually for 6 hours. Strange, must seem really strange from the outside. And yet it felt like pure experience of joy. And I thought, well, this is unusual. And it's cool, man, you know. And it was like the answer I'd been waiting for. Now, I went to work the next day, and I was tired, and I felt like I had my answer. And then it took me a few days to realize, well, what the heck does energy mean? What does that really mean? And it took me a while I went through a few different things. I tried to retrain myself in renewable energy and some other things, trying to get myself out of the defense industry and express my being in a different way. And then I came across Tesla's work, or generally the free energy arena, what we call new energy technology, about 2012. And I thought, whoa, okay, well, here's something I could certainly pin my hat on. Here's something I can use all these engineering skills that I've learned over the years, which I thought were pointless. I thought everything I'd learned was pointless. And yet here was an area which I felt I could actually do something useful in the world with the skills I'd learned. And a lot of those skills are to do with making power measurements. Like, this is the black art of making power measurements. It is incredible. And I had some great teachers who taught me exactly what to do with making any type of power measurement. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So there was a sense I had, 2012, this idea of Tesla and new energy technologies. My personal journey, my personal story was that I felt like I had personally been brought down this path in the defense industry for a reason. Everything suddenly made sense. And so I began to apply myself in this arena. I was still in the defense industry at this time. So next couple of years, 2012, 2014, I just went up the learning curve rapidly in this arena. I was going into a lot of different theories. Like I said, I'm a theory guy, but not to the level of some of the people here, but I'll have a good conversation with people, but more the practical application of the theory. There were an awful lot of different theories about how this technology is supposed to work, and there's no textbooks. To that stage, I was used to having the textbooks telling me what the rules were. There was no real creative thinking involved in designing a lot of the technologies. And now suddenly we had this whole new area of different theories and renegade professors and crazy people coming from the garages with different ideas and books on unified field theories and all sorts of different things. And it really felt like the Wild West of science, which has been referred to before in many times. There were no rules, and it was really difficult to know what to believe. I did obviously, like many of you, I did a lot of internet research. I went on the forums, and I was noticing that there are a lot of opinions about either something definitely works or it definitely doesn't work, and it works for this reason or it doesn't work for that reason. And it's very easy to go from one side to the other, and it's really difficult to know what the truth is. Very, very difficult indeed. So I realized that there was really only one way to find out whether this was true or not, because it was going to violate everything that I had been taught. It was going to violate everything that all my work colleagues had been taught. So, this was pretty big. If this was going to actually happen, we had to do this really properly. So we began testing. This is one particular technology. This was one of the first ones I was involved with. And here I'm just going to interject with a little story about how this came about. And I've got a bunch of stories like this, but here's a pretty good example of how there is something else going on beneath the technology which is guiding us. I got to say it like that. I've been learning about Konstantin Mile had done a theory on scalar waves, and people say it's not the right term, doesn't matter. It was an interesting theory. And I then cropped across this website, Jean-Louis Naudin, who did some sort of open sourcing of various technologies, one of which was the so-called scalar waves transmitter. And I was looking for something simple that I could get in the lab and build and test. And we needed to prove it, one way or the other. Is it true or not? Come on, let's find out. So I found this online, and I was sat there at work one day, and I thought, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I can build this. All the schematics are online. And then this guy that I worked with, old guy called Bob, and by this time word had got around the office that I was getting into some strange things. And Bob comes in, he goes, and he says, John, you're into weird stuff, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And he goes, well, we were just clearing out some old shelving racks in storage. And he says, and he found this, and we found this, and we thought you'd be interested in. And he puts this thing on the table, and it is, and I've been looking at this 10 minutes before on the internet, and it is the exact scalar wave transmitter. I mean, this isn't even a story which changes every time I tell it. This is exactly what happened. And everyone in the office, I don't know, it was like a shiver went through. It was like, and because everyone knew I was just looking at this 10 minutes before, and we were like, how is this possible? And Bob said that some graduate had looked at it 10 years before, and I don't know, maybe it didn't work. But either way, it went on the rack as into storage, and then it appears on my desk. And so then I know that something else is going on here that I need to pay attention to. And this is really the story of how the next 5 years has led to us being sat here on these chairs right now. It's a little story which tells you there's something deeper going on in this field. So in this case, I'm just going to tell you quickly what I found, because it's damn amazing. I took this thing down into the lab, and we've got a screened room, which is just, I don't know, it's about the size of this stage. It's got walls that thick. It's a Faraday cage, which blocks the electric fields, and it's got all sorts of magnetic screening to block the magnetic fields. It costs, I don't know, probably £5 million. Really good piece of equipment. So I had a transmitter and a receiver. Transmitter was the scalar wave transmitter. The receiver was, to start with, I was using a long wave radio, and I just had to tune it until I found the signal. And then we had some better receiver equipment after that where we could quantify the signal. But as a starter, it was pretty good. And I was trying to work out the radiation pattern from this antenna. And antennas are my thing. This is what I design. I know all about antennas. And this was such a strange design. You can see from the pattern, they have something called the caduceus coil all the way around, which is an interesting pattern. It's supposed to nullify the magnetic fields or something. And I couldn't pick up a signal around this antenna. Normally, a normal antenna, you get a radiation pattern around the waist, as they say. This had a radiation pattern straight off the end, and it was a pencil beam. It was so narrow. And I did these tests with the receiver where I'd go out to about the length of the lab, which was about 30 meters. And even at 30 meters, the size of the received signal was about this. So it wasn't like expanding. It was just narrow, super, super narrow, pencil beam. And I didn't notice any reduction in signal with distance. And I thought, whoa, what is this about? Is this to do with frequency or not? But anyway, I then put this antenna, the receiver radio, into the screened room, closed the door. It's got about 90 dB screening, right? Which means you'll get, I don't know, is that a billion, right? You screen the signal, it'll be a billionth of the size, right? So there's absolutely no way a signal should get through this screen room. And there was zero reduction in the size of the signal that I was picking up on my receiver. So I realized that this is a potential anomaly. I'll never call it a definite anomaly. It needs further testing. With me, it always needs further testing, just so you know. But in this case, this is a potential anomaly. And when I looked into the theory more, they're talking about some type of energy transmission not using conventional electromagnetic radiation. And that led on to a whole bunch more of experiments I did, and I had very similar results. So I knew something was not in alignment with what I'd been taught. And that was enough for me to know that there might be some reality to this arena of new physics. So with that, I got out of the defense industry. I thought, that's enough. That's all the evidence I need to know that this isn't just crazy science. Actually, there's some reality behind this. And actually, there's another experiment I did, which I'm not going to tell you about because it eventually got classified, but it was a replication of a paper published in the Institute of Physics, which was to antenna, again, an antenna receiver were transmitting a signal between A and B, not using conventional electromagnetic signal. It was using what they call a null field magnetic vector potential signal. And again, that was so you got Institute of Paper Physics, replication of experiment, and I thought, great. So I took that off to the University of Bristol, went to the head of the physics department and said, there you go, there's your science, paper, replication, and he just kicked me out of there. He did not want to know about this. And what's really funny is this physics department were, one of the things they're famous for, this is in Bristol in the UK, one of the things they're famous for is something called the Aronov bomb effect, which in this world of free energy is the most important experiment I think that's ever been done. It's really fundamental. And I won't go into that now, but this is where the experiment was done. And then this paper I was replicating was based upon the Aronov bomb experiment. They call it a macro Aronov bomb experiment. And then when you replicate the results and you take it back to the origin, they didn't want to know. And I just thought, so I can't rely on academia. Okay, maybe I picked the wrong professor, but I felt there's no home there for me, because I wanted to go and do this in academia. And then I thought, well, I don't want to do this in the defense industry, so I just got out. I was gone.
Any reason why the man doesn't want to?
Well, I don't know. It's probably, I mean, my boss who I was working with at the time, who was really open-minded, and he supported me a lot on this, he says, what he said was, and he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, a guy called Adam, and he just taught me everything about power measurements, and he said and he deliberately didn't go into the academic arena because he says it's just people protecting their turf. They have a very fixed idea about what they know, and anything that challenges that, it's like it challenges their sense of self or ego. So yeah, I mean, that's one view on it. I think it's probably fairly close. By the way, is there like a timer so I got an idea of what's going on? Just, yeah, well, I got a lot to get through, man. Okay. So anyway, that set me off 2014 through 17. Got out of the defense industry, self-funded myself, and I began the work. And there's a nice little map there, which is giving an idea of where I ended up. I did a lot of traveling to try and find technologies, free energy, new energy technologies that actually worked. And I would turn up with a suitcase full of really high-end measurement equipment, your oscilloscopes, the voltage probes, the current probes, all sorts of things to try and test what works and what doesn't. And I'd connect with people through the internet, through YouTube. Eventually I got a pretty decent reputation, so people would come to me. They'd come to my lab that I'd set up in the UK. Sometimes I'd have an investor who wanted to invest in something, so they'd get me to go and check out the technology. But the bottom line was, there was nothing really working that I could find, 2014 to 17. The first, actually, I'll give a story of the very first one that I came in contact with. This is the very first project where I'd got out of the defense industry. I was no longer working and hiding myself. And I went and worked on an open source project, which was in Morocco, called the QEG, Quantum Electrical Generator, which is almost notorious now for people who are in this area. And I loved the idea of it, I must say. The idea was to have an open source technology. We talked yesterday a lot about open sourcing, where everything would be uploaded online, and you'd have technology teams all over the world working off the blueprints. And to me, this was really tuning in with this ethical epiphany I had had about, my spiritual awakening was saying to be of service in this world. And this was really tuning into that sense of ethics. So I loved it. So I turned up in Morocco in the most tiny little village you can imagine, really third world, no running water or anything. And there was a group of people from around the world, maybe 80 people, all different nationalities, and they were there to build this thing. They want to put their energy into it. And it was a wonderful, wonderful environment to be in, to have so many people supporting this. Anyway, we began building it, and there was a big crowdsourced campaign. They were raising a good amount of money to support this, to buy the parts and buy people's flights and so on. It was actually a pretty good model, I think, for doing this in an open source way. But when I arrived and when we started building it, I was asking the pertinent questions, which is, so, have you got this thing working previously? Oh, yeah, we got it working, right? Okay, great, okay. So we got it powered up, and then I open up the suitcase of measurement equipment and start probing the heck out of this thing. And I'm thinking, how do they know this actually worked? Because it's high voltage, we're talking like 30,000, 30 kV, right? It was high frequency. If you put, you need floating differential voltage probes, because otherwise it just detunes everything, which I had all of this stuff. But when I turned up, there was just a multimeter there. And I thought, who measured this at Over Unity before it was taken on the road? Oh, no, it's working. Okay, great. So I measured this thing, and to start with, I got a COP of it wasn't bad. It was about 0.8 or something like that. It was like, whatever, 1,000 watts in and 800 watts out. Not bad, when I say not bad for a motor generator, but it wasn't over Unity. And then what I noticed was the online crowd was starting to get, they putting their money into this, and the online crowd was starting to ask the hard questions. Where's the measurement data? And everyone's looking to me, and I'm like, okay, listen, I'm not putting my name on this. I'm just here to make the measurements. But just so you know, yeah, it's not over Unity. That's all I can tell you. But then, yeah, we always used to have this thing in the corporate world where you have the technical department and the marketing department. And the marketing department put a lot of selling on what is not real. And what I realized was that when people say it's working, what does working actually mean? The fact a motor's spinning doesn't mean it's working at over Unity. So I learned that lesson pretty quickly. I wrote a report which got published online. It was about, 50 pages, basically saying it was under Unity. And that's fine. We got to the truth. And it lost steam after that. So I'm thankful for that experience, because I ended up meeting some people who financially supported me. I loved the concept of the open sourcing, and I think it's something we all need to do. But what I realized is the standards for what works and what doesn't were abominably low, especially having come out of a professional engineering environment. So here we go. Then something happened, 2017. I realized there was something missing. Now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, actually, and I'm not here to say, well, we need more women in this arena, which would be great. This is more about, there's an energy dynamic, which I've touched upon already, which I feel is underpinning all of this. And I feel it needs to come more to the forefront. Now, when I was working in the defense industry, I mentioned this last night at dinner. There was a sense of, it's hard to describe, there was a sense of grayness, like a soul grayness of the people that I worked with all around me. There was no life. I loved the guys and women and men that I worked with. I loved working with them. But there was no life, or at least I didn't experience life in the work they were doing. It felt very mechanical. There was a real grayness to it, is the only way I can express it. Now, when I went and worked on the QEG, for example, there was life everywhere. I could see people were pouring their hearts and soul into this, and I'd never had an experience like this of working in a lab where people were genuinely pouring their being into what was being created in front of them. And it was a profound experience for me. It was a new way of engineering that I'd never experienced before. Now, having gone and seen quite a lot of inventors, so there was something that I noticed, and that is that they were not engineering in the conventional way, in the way that I had seen conventional engineering done. They were tuning in to something. And I met Susan in 2017, and we began to meet inventors. And Susan would talk to me about a completely different way of tuning in. And she really brought to clarification in me, who was a total, I approached engineering in a very conventional way to that stage. I saw something, Susan brought to me a different way of doing science and engineering. And as Susan mentioned, during this time, I had been reading a lot of work by Rudolf Steiner, who some of you will know. And I'd been reading about something which has been called moral technology, and I think someone mentioned these words, moral technology, yesterday. And these two words for me, and for Susan and I, are very important. What does this mean? So in Steiner's case, he described a future of science, a future way of doing engineering and science. And this is a pseudo quote, "For the scientists of the future, the workbench will become an altar." And I read that sometime around 2012, and I thought, well, what does that mean? And he said that the way science is done today is almost an objective, dead experience where you have the inventor, the engineer, the scientist, and then you have the thing he's building. And it's like there's a disconnect between the two. And that was just how I had always experienced engineering. And Steiner would talk about a new way in the future where the scientist and the thing that was being created, there was less of a separation, or perhaps no separation at all. There was a conscious process that was going on. There was consciousness in what was being created, almost a living force. And he says this is the way that mankind can develop technology of the future, where he begins to pour something of himself into what is coming in front of him. And so this is how I understood the altar, not in a religious sense, but in this kind of sacred science sense. This was a soul science that was going on. And so when I met Susan, she had some very many interesting experiences which she told me about. And when I talked to her about moral technology, she says, yes, that's it. This is something that she had direct experience of, and I'd love her to talk about that one day. So she had an active experience about something I had read about. And we knew that this was to do with the bringing of however we phrase it, the yin and the yang. There was a holisticness and a holistic approach that needed to come in order to move ourselves towards the future. And when we began to meet inventors who all started to tell us the same stories, they were living examples of what this new holistic, new way of science was. And it was very intuitive. It was tuning in. It was, God, when I was working in the defense industry, my boss once suggested that maybe we should all go for a walk in nature to get some ideas, right? And we were told, no, you can't do that, right? And here we are. We have inventors creating things which are far beyond what 1,000 well-qualified PhD physicists can do. And they're doing it by tuning into nature, listening to dreams, hunches, intuitions. I'll list the things they're tuning into. They're tuning into we've had God, we've had the aliens, we've had the angels, the higher self, we've had the whole spectrum, and all of our inventors are telling us the same story. They are just listening, and they are being guided. And so what I began to see was what Steiner talked about 100 years ago, which was the way I believe genuinely that science of the future will be done. So this was a profound thing, and we realized that this goes far beyond free energy technology. We're talking about a profound new shift in the way that we approach science and life in general. And that was when Nui was born. This was a concept that was born out of this wanting to create a vessel, a conscious container for the future of the way of doing science, bringing spirit into science and also business. Right? You can genuinely bring a lot of ethics into business and do this well. Now, there's a dove there, right? And you probably noticed the dove in the in our logo. Now, I'm not religious. I often say I dodged that bullet. Did not get, no offense to anyone who's religious, I did not get preloaded with any type of religion, and I'm still to this day not. And yet, when Susan and I almost made this declaration, it felt like a declaration to the universe that we were going to create this new organization to allow this new impulse to come through, this moral technology. We suddenly began to get guided in the most profound way. That little example with the scalar wave transmitter earlier was just one story of something that's happened so many dozens of times for us at every stage of our journey. And here's another one. So this was we went to see an inventor in Austria, and we had an hour to kill before we met the inventor. And Susan and I are always saying, let's look out for signs. Let's look out for signs. Let's just be aware. see what wants to come. And we just walked in this church. It was a lovely church. And all of a sudden, as we walked in, the sun came up past this window and it shone right on our faces. You remember this? And we were like bathing in this kind of glow. And it honestly, it felt like a religious experience is all I can say. And we were like, what's in the middle? And we had to wait for this. And then it was the dove. And we were like, oh my God. So we just know. And we've got so many stories like this. So there's this guidance. There is something that is going on behind this, behind the scenes. And it's beautiful. All I can say, it's the most beautiful thing possible. And this, as an experience compared to working in the defense industry, is nothing. So the universe responds. It was the most strange thing that then happened after that. Having gone 3 years on my own, looking for tech, failing. And then Susan and I made this declaration that this is how we were going to move forwards with our work. Then, the very first technology vetting that Susan came along with me for, down in South America, the first technology worked. It was like, wow, okay, this is great. That was December 2017. I thought, this is great. And then January, went over to Indonesia. The second one worked. February was in, I can't remember, South Europe somewhere. Another one worked. California the month after that. Austria the month after that. And they just kept coming. Atlanta the month after that. And we got to 5, 6, 7 very, very quickly of technologies. When I say, does it work, this means that I can't disprove it. Using all the skills I've got, not saying that I'm infallible, I'm definitely not. But as a good first test, I couldn't work out whether I couldn't disprove it. And this was quite amazing for us, as you can imagine. We then realized that the question had now moved from, does this technology work, to what do we do with this? Every single dot you see, and these are the blue dots are the ones where we think that works, and the red dots are the ones that don't work. Every single one of those, which just looks like a dot on there, is a relationship. And it takes a lot, many of you will know, it takes a long time to build trust with inventors. And I'm an inventor myself. I got all sorts of patents. I understand about the knowledge that comes in is like a baby, and it needs to be protected. And to hand your baby over to someone is a big, big thing. And so for us, it's about relationship. We don't go in throwing contracts in. We build the relationship and we build the trust. And we've tried to connect investors to several of these technologies, and we've been successful in doing that. But some of them have failed. We heard about the dynamic yesterday from Robert and Roberto. They don't trust the inventors. And so there's such a role here for this middle ground that Gaia projects and that the Nui Foundation are holding. It is this middle ground of trust and integrity, not just about getting the technology to work, but the relationships to the inventors is just paramount if we are going to be successful in bringing this through. So this is kind of what we realized. When we started getting to the stage where technology was beginning to work, we felt like we had to raise the game in terms of the standards. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier with the Wild Wests. The fonts didn't come out so well, never mind. We were being called by a lot of inventors. Our name was getting out there to come and visit their technologies. We have emails in our inboxes all the time talking to us, we got this great idea. This happens so much to us. So we're becoming a bit of a beacon. Oh yeah, these guys, I think you can trust them. Go and have a chat to them. And we got a bit overwhelmed, to be frank. There was so much new stuff coming in that we needed to create a structure and a process. So we formed the organisation Nui sort of 2018, late 2018, and we've been building a team around us ever since. And an important part of that is the vetting team. And there's some really experienced people that we're working with who have vetted, really hundreds of technologies. And they've been helping us to really define what works and what doesn't, and how to create a process in order to put that piece together. So this is a cut down version of the vetting protocols, as we call them. But it gives you a good idea about what we're up to. So we're interested in setting some type of gold standard, right? Which is, we are highly aware, as Robert and Roberto are, of taking a technology to an investor and saying, fund this. We try not to do that at all until we are happy that we've gone through the vetting protocols as much as we can, because all of this takes money. And then we go as far as we can. And then when we do approach some type of income investment, we'll let them know exactly what level the technology is at, okay? Because we've seen investors working with inventors, and they've funded them to the tune of millions. And they've got great labs, great people, but the tech doesn't work. And that's fine as long as the investor knows it's an R&D project, not a working technology. An investor doesn't know the difference, mostly, right? So what we thought was, okay, it's fine to receive investment as long as the investor knows where the technology's at. So we've got these, as I said, this is a cut-down version, but I'll just run you through quickly the four standards. So what we have, the first standard is inventors come to us with the idea, and we do a remote vetting. We spent too much time on airplanes finding stuff that didn't work, right? And it's expensive, right? It's expensive. So we actually, I know it makes sense in hindsight, but it's too easy to jump on a plane. But we actually got to the point where actually we could do this remotely using Skype or Zoom. And so what I would ask for is, I'd say, hey, sounds like a great idea. Can you make these measurements specifically? Do it for me, please. And some cases, the inventors who can't even use an oscilloscope, which is fine, okay. So I'll teach them how to use an oscilloscope. Sometimes I'll send them an oscilloscope and some voltage probes. I'll say, just get the data for me. So for a few $100, I can usually get a pretty good first grasp of whether the tech works. And actually, you can disprove a heck of a lot like that, like really quickly, which is great. I'm just going to clarify this word failure down here, because we've had a lot of failures. I don't think the word failure is quite right. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to generally raise the standards in this arena. There are hundreds of inventors with the best will in the world, and they're all working for free. This is like the most wonderful, mission-orientated workforce there is. So what we have to do is we have to teach them, okay, how do you make the right measurements, okay? Have you thought about this? How about connecting with these guys? So we're setting up groups of inventors all the time, disparate inventors who never speak to anybody. We set up groups and then they work together. None of them have got anything that works, so they would be classed as a failure, which is why it's not the right word. But that's okay. We're raising the standards and helping them to see how to make the right measurements. But anyway, so we'll do the first remote vetting, and we've got about 11 technologies that have passed that so far. And then we move to the second level, which is when we will jump on a plane. This will be an internal Nui. We've got 3 or 4 technology vetters. We'll go and test the technology with the best equipment we can. There are quite a lot of different types of technologies. Personally, I'm really good with electronics, solid state, voltage, current, with heat systems, pretty good at. We've got a lot of rotational systems, apparently using gravity, which are fairly straightforward to measure. LENR, honestly, I don't get involved in that. It's for me, I find it difficult. I leave it to the experts. But there's lots of different categories of technology. So we'll give it a good first test, and then what happens is we'll invite the specialist in, the third party, the engineering company, whoever, to come in and give it a really robust assessment. And so, so you can see we've gone 11 tech, and then we've got about 7 technologies that we think work. And then we've got two technologies where we've had a third-party opinion that works. And at that stage, we're starting to think, okay, so do we have something here? This looks really interesting. When you get enough people saying this works, this begins to look interesting. Now, protocol 4 is fine. Okay, so the other person says it works. Can you replicate it in a neutral location? And we've had failures at this point where everybody says it works, and then you go and put it in a different location, rebuild it from scratch, and it doesn't work. And we've had one recently which has been like that. And it's frustrating because every single level of this is funding, and it sucks you dry, I can tell you. So to get a failure here is really hard. And so what we're doing at the moment, we've got our two technologies which look pretty good. And I've spoken to some people about these two at the conference. Right this second, we're booking plane tickets and things to get them to bring their tech to our lab in Scotland to leave the tech with us, and we'll do some testing on it for several weeks. We saw yesterday the see-through big room. We want this thing like impeccable, because ultimately, this is going to have our name on it, and if it passes that, then we'll approve it. And if it's approved, from our point of view, we've done as much as we can in terms of due diligence and risk and de-risking this technology, and we believe it's now ready for proper investment, commercial development, open sourcing, however we want to do it. So this is pretty much the process we're using. This is a nice little statistic. So we did this the other day. We added up just rough numbers, the number of technologies our vetting team has seen, about 200 odd, and most of them are failures. So it gives you an idea. If you're an investor, this gives you an idea of how easy it is to lose money in this field. Unbelievable, right? And we've seen it. We've seen it. So I had these slides this morning. I woke up about 3 a.m. and I thought I need to give a little teaser. Now I'm under NDA for every single technology. So all I'm going to do is just give you the performance, which is fine to give, I think. So this is one technology that we've seen. So what we have is this was actually tested. So this is a technology that was tested in the field. It was on top of a shopping centre, and there was a motor attached to air conditioning system. And the technology is a solid-state box of electronics. It's about shoebox size. Probably cost peanuts to build on the manufacturing line, and that is inserted before the motor. Okay, and the idea is it provides efficiencies. So in standard configuration, i.e. without the special box, the air conditioning unit was pulling about close to 7 kVA, 31 amps, 3-phase. So that's standard. When the magic box, which we've called Nui Tech, actually the inventors wouldn't like us calling that, but we don't want to use their names. When you inserted the box, the current dropped from 31 amps down to 3 amps, which is about a 90% energy use savings. You pay for the volt amps in this case. You got and for the same amount of air conditioning, you got a 90% saving in electricity. And so it's interesting. So this is going to be one of the ones we are going to be testing the heck out when it arrives in our lab in a few weeks' time. And there's all sorts of applications of this. So like we saw yesterday with Peter's talk, this isn't specific to air conditioning units or a car. This is applicable to anything with a motor. So motors use 45% of the world's electricity. So electric cars. We've done some other tests on pumping water, for irrigation. There's all sorts of applications. And it's applicable also for not just inductive loads, but resistive loads, like bulbs and things like this. I'm not going to show you that data, but it really is pretty sensational what we've seen. So we're at the beginning of this journey with testing the full use of this technology's capability. 90% energy reduction. It's a good start. So this is a second technology that has really gone through the vetting protocols, and we're thinking, there's something to this. So we went back and saw this inventor 3-4 times, ran it through the vetting protocols, and it was a modest performance, I would call it. I would say in the realm of measurement error, for sure. But what I originally saw was, you've got a DC battery running to a box of, again, solid-state electronics, okay? And actually, I think these two are using the same theory. And then that runs to a motor, okay? So the motor was connected just to a fan, so it was loaded, but not too heavily. So I've got this up on the oscilloscope, and I'm looking at power in and power out, and I'm going 112 in, 150 out. So they looked like there was an increase in power, COP of 1.34. So it was interesting enough to think there might be something to this. So at that stage, we said to them, well, if you do have more power out than power in, you need to self-loop this. Come on, guys. Stick a generator on that and self-loop that. So that's what we've been funding them to do over the past 6 or so months. So they've been building a motor generator to tap off some of the electrical power. The inventor tells us he's got the COP up to about 5, so it gives him enough to get over the inefficiencies of the system. And what dropped into my inbox yesterday morning, so by the way, so this is what we call a protocol 3 measurement, vetting in person by specialist. We had a specialist with us. But now they've developed the system to self-loop. We go back to protocol 1, which is they sent some data over the internet to us, right? Now what they've done, and this is the data that came into my inbox yesterday, like I said, is they've got the motor generator, they've got the self-loop back into the box, they've removed the battery, replaced it with a capacitor, which is great. I don't want to see any battery in there. And then they've got a load of some light bulbs. So data I don't have yet is how much power is going to the light bulbs, how much power is going to be self-looped, etc. But if the thing self-loops and it's powering some light bulbs, I'm extremely happy with that. So this is what they've provided. So the conclusion for protocol 1 is it looks to be self-sustaining, which of course is the holy grail. So one of the next steps is to go and do protocol 2 again, which is to fly over there, check it out, and so on. So it's an example of like how we're always continuing to increase the level of the standards. So how long have I got? Enough? That's good. All right. So what's next? 2019, 2020. We began to touch upon this yesterday. So it appears, and that's just 2 technologies, by the way, that you probably saw. There's a whole bunch of other blue dots of other technologies that are in the pipeline. In some cases, they're a bit more difficult to work with. They need a lot of funding. They're much higher power. We're not just talking kilowatts. We're talking much higher power. To engage that, we need proper investors to come in and engage that. So, but there's all sorts of things in the pipeline. So the next stage is, what do we do with this? So we've been building relationships with manufacturers particularly. Really, we talked earlier about this like the spiritual awakening process. Well, it's not just the inventors that are happening to, it's happening to everybody. It's the investors, it's the manufacturers, and we have met with the most profoundly awesome people who have come into our lives synchronistically, showing up at the right moment. And they're manufacturers. How useful is that? They can do the R&D, they can develop the prototypes, they can bring it up towards manufacturing standard. And so we're working with them, and we'll be flying out after this to go and meet with the manufacturer that we're working very closely with to begin to put a business model around the development of these technologies. An important point, as we were discussing yesterday, is there is a strategy that is required for this. You can't just go walking out onto the market with a free energy device. And I think there's a perhaps arguably there's a multifaceted strategy you could use: open source, closed source, hidden source, which is where you hide the technology in another product, which is kind of a neat idea. And there's a bunch of other ideas as well, and just hope that something pops through. I think that we need to explore this question of strategy. The tech is coming online. You've seen that. You've seen it in some of what you saw yesterday with the Gaia guys. The tech is coming online. Now we have this really important question of what we do next. Now, we've just put one example there of the sorts of things we're talking with the manufacturer. We have an opportunity here to really integrate and show the new way of doing things in this world. Some of you will be familiar with the circular economy, the idea that you can keep things. I think someone mentioned it yesterday, that you can keep the products in circulation. I think that if we can be the torchbearer to really show the new way to do things, I think this is a golden opportunity. So that's what we're working with our manufacturers at the moment. The other thing I'd say is, using investor language, this is now an emerging market, for sure. Now, we heard about some of these guys yesterday, and I know the guys have intimate knowledge of at least 2 of these. And I know people are very much involved with this. And people will have an opinion. Okay, we go back to the start of the talk. An opinion about it's true or not true, right? As I said, I'm interested in does it work or not. So I haven't personally tested any of these. But these are all, I would say, they're out there now. Little story. My mum called me the other day. And she says her friend Clive called her about his plumber came round to fix his toilet and starts talking to him about infinity salve. The plumber. Nothing against plumbers. I mean, they're worth their weight in gold, literally. But the plumber knows about infinity salve. This means that we are beginning to talk about these things in a very normal way. It's becoming normalized. This is definitely an emerging market. You've no doubt all seen this article in the Wall Street Journal of the Earth Engine article. So I think that's okay. I think this is definitely breaking. I think we can approach investors and say, this is a thing. We've got the science, we've got the engineering standards to show exactly where we are in their development, and that's okay as well. We don't need to pitch for funding and sell an idea that maybe is more than they think it is. We can just do this transparently and openly. So I really want to land that. We don't need to get caught in the, this is never going to happen. I think it's already happening. And I think that is I think that's about the consciousness is now ready for this, genuinely. Just a very short bit on our organization. We were formed in early 2019. We set up as a community interest company in the UK, and this is part of us trying to express some of the values that are really important to us. And that's so we're in the UK. Most of the management team, some of whom are sat here, are in the US, and then we got labs and teams all over the place, and they're working all the time. Even right now, they're probably watching this. And they'll know who they are. And that's great. It's great to have these guys working. And these are people with the highest ethical standards. We've had to eject quite a few people who we work with because their values were not up to it. And what we've distilled is a really, really good, strong group of people. We've also got, we are in the process of setting up a demonstration facility in Scotland, which, as I mentioned, we're going to be sorting out in the week after this conference. And there we're going to have things that we can present to people. And there's a few people I've spoken to already about inviting up to see what we've got. And this is part of the transparent process. We're not selling it. We want people to come in and climb all over it and measure it and just do the due diligence. A little bit on the structure. This is less important, but effectively, where Nui sits is this kind of like tech incubation type of organization. We're working with external teams, but we've also got internal teams as well. This is probably the wrong word, Nui-owned IP, but we're very much thinking about the open source approach. There's strategies that we're working with groups on how to best open source that. And there's some real good level, high level strategic conversations that are happening about how to do that with inventors who have already agreed to open source. So these conversations are going on. So even though this looks like a conventional business model of licensing, that's only really one approach. In our case, as part of the community interest company, we're putting all the profit down to continuing to support these projects. That actually helps us a lot when we're working with inventors, because it kind of makes us look like we're doing this for the right reasons, which I hope is true. And we have worked to bring some pretty darn good manufacturers on side, really highly capable global manufacturers who are also in this for the right reason and who just want to help. And they are just sat there waiting. I tell you, this thing's going to fly. So this is an important piece. obviously. We haven't taken any investment so far, which is totally important for us. We've been philanthropically funded, and that has enabled us to stay, I would say, clean in our motivations. As we move forward towards taking the next level of investment to do this properly in terms of the tech development, we're going to have to be working with some different financial models in order to get that going. And so that's an open question, and this week we're going to be exploring that as well. Back to the captain. Sounds great, does it work? Right now, I would say it's looking promising. I don't think you'll ever hear me say definite until I see these things out on the production line, but we have really done some due diligence to take this to the next level. It is all to do, in our view, raising the standards, being totally transparent with what you've got and what you haven't got, and then, of course, the ethics. This is the underlying consciousness behind all of it. Now, I'll leave you with one slide. So I work closely with Susan, and she sent me a message the other day, bit of a download. And I'm going to leave you with this because it profoundly affected me. True revolutionaries and true leaders do not seek comfort. They do not continue the status quo. They change it. They change it because it needs to be changed. Because that is what evolution is. It morphs, transitions, and spirals up to a higher octave. We have a massively lulled society that accepts far too many ways of life without ever doing the diligence to ask, where did this come from? How does it serve me today? How does this impact me and my children, my future grandchildren? The true revolutionaries have had incredible stories of struggle and strife, and they persevere no matter what they can lose. They do it because they are willing to be the oddballs, to become ostracized, to take the flying, flamed arrows. And they make being a human being in this world a far better place because they are courageous enough to do that. Thank you very much.